I showed up to my family's holiday brunch with my kids. My mom smirked. "Your presence always makes things harder. You should leave." My sister laughed. My kids asked, "Why didn't Grandma want us?" I just replied, "Let's go home." And we drove away. An hour later, my dad called. "Why is the bank card locked? We can't even pay the brunch tab." I ignored them until they went crazy. I, 34 pulled into the country club parking lot that Sunday morning with my two kids buckled in the back seat. My daughter was excited about seeing her grandparents, and my son kept asking if there would be pancakes. I told them both yes, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. The truth was, I hadn't wanted to come. These family brunches had become something I dreaded, but my kids deserved to know their grandparents, even if those grandparents made it increasingly clear they had their favorites. We walked through the entrance, and I spotted them immediately at their usual corner table by the windows. Mom sat there in her cream-colored blazer, the one she wore when she wanted to look important. Dad was scrolling through his phone. My sister occupied the seat beside Mom, leaning in close like they were sharing secrets. When they saw us approaching, the conversation stopped abruptly. Mom's face did something I'd seen too many times before. Her smile tightened, became forced, and she glanced at my sister with that look they shared when I was the topic of discussion. My daughter ran ahead anyway, excited to hug her grandmother, but Mom's embrace was brief, mechanical. She patted my daughter's head once, and then immediately turned her attention back to my sister. I pulled out chairs for my kids and sat down myself. The waiter came over, and I ordered juice for the children and coffee for myself. Mom watched this entire interaction with her lips pressed into a thin line, as though my presence had somehow ruined her morning. Nobody asked how we were doing. Nobody asked about the kids' school or their recent activities. The conversation picked up exactly where it had left off, with Mom and my sister discussing plans for some charity event my sister was organizing. 20 minutes passed this way. My son tugged at my sleeve and asked quietly if we could order food yet. I flagged down the waiter and asked for the kids' menu. That's when Mom finally acknowledged our existence beyond those first strained pleasantries. She looked directly at me with that expression I knew too well, the one that said she was about to deliver something cruel disguised as casual observation. She told me that my presence always made things harder for everyone. She suggested it might be better if I just left. The words came out smooth, almost conversational, like she was commenting on the weather. My sister actually laughed, this short burst of agreement that made my stomach turn. The table went quiet after that. My daughter's face crumpled slightly, confused. My son looked between his grandmother and me, trying to understand what had just happened. I felt my jaw tighten, felt that familiar surge of anger mixed with something worse, that childhood wound of never being quite good enough for them reopening. My daughter asked me in a small voice why Grandma didn't want us there. The question hung in the air, and I saw Mom's face flush slightly, but she didn't take it back. She didn't apologize. She just looked away, as though my daughter hadn't spoken at all. I told my kids we were going home. I kept my voice steady and calm, even though fury was building behind my ribs. I stood up, helped my children out of their chairs, and we walked out of that country club without another word. Behind me, I heard my sister say something to Mom, and they both laughed again, softer this time, but still audible. The drive home was quiet. My daughter asked twice more why Grandma had been mean, and I told her that sometimes grown-ups say things they shouldn't, but it wasn't her fault. My son asked if we could still get pancakes, so we stopped at a diner on the way home. We sat in a booth, just the three of us, and my kids seemed to bounce back the way children do. But I couldn't stop thinking about that smirk on Mom's face, that casual cruelty she'd perfected over the years. What my family didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask about or acknowledge, was that I'd been supporting them financially for the last 3 years. When Dad's business collapsed, when their retirement accounts proved insufficient, when my sister's husband left her with debt, I was the one who stepped in. I set up a family account that they all had access to, funded it monthly with significant amounts, and never once mentioned it or held it over their heads. I did it because they were family, because I thought that's what you did. The credit card they used for everything, the one that paid for these lavish brunches and Mom's shopping trips and my sister's rent, was connected to an account I controlled. I'd structured it that way deliberately, wanting to maintain some oversight while still giving them the dignity of access. They treated it like free money, like some endless well that existed for their convenience. An hour after we left that country club, my phone started ringing. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately. I ignored it again. Then Mom called. Then my sister. The messages started pouring in, frantic and confused. Dad's voicemail asked why the bank card wasn't working. He said they couldn't pay the Brunch tab, that the card had been declined, and what was going on. There was panic in his voice, embarrassment. Mom's message was more accusatory, demanding to know what I'd done and insisting I fix it immediately. My sister sent a text calling me petty and childish. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I sat on my couch while my kids watched cartoons, and I opened my banking app. With a few taps, I locked the family account entirely. No withdrawals, no purchases, no access. Then I transferred the remaining balance, nearly $40,000 that I'd accumulated there for their use, into a separate trust account for my children's education. The calls kept coming throughout the day. I watched my phone light up over and over, each call more desperate than the last. Dad left another message explaining they'd had to call my uncle to come pay the brunch bill, that they'd been humiliated in front of the club staff. Mom's texts grew increasingly angry, demanding I call her back and stop being ridiculous over one small comment. That phrase struck me. One small comment. As though years of dismissal and preference for my sister could be reduced to one small comment. As though telling me to leave, in front of my children, was just a minor slip of the tongue. By evening, my sister called from Dad's phone, probably thinking I might answer if I didn't recognize the number. I didn't pick up. Her voicemail was long and rambling, oscillating between anger and attempts at manipulation. She said I was overreacting, that Mom hadn't meant anything by it, that I was being selfish and punishing them for no reason. She mentioned her rent was due in a few days, and she needed access to the account. I deleted the message halfway through. The next morning, I received an email from Dad. It was calmer, more measured, the kind of communication he defaulted to when he wanted something badly enough to suppress his pride. He explained that they relied on that account for daily expenses, that Mom's medication needed to be refilled, that my sister had car insurance due. He asked what I wanted, what it would take to restore access. I wrote back a single line. I told him I wanted an apology to my children. His response came an hour later. He said that seemed reasonable and that Mom would call them soon to apologize. I replied that I wanted it in person, at my house, with no excuses or justifications. Just an acknowledgement that what was said was wrong and that my kids deserved better. The response took longer this time, almost 3 hours. He said Mom felt I was being too harsh, that she'd already apologized in her own way, and couldn't we just move past this? I didn't reply. 2 days passed. My phone continued ringing intermittently, but the calls grew less frequent. I assumed they'd found alternative resources, maybe borrowed from relatives or scraped together enough from their own limited accounts to manage temporarily. I didn't particularly care. On the third day, my sister showed up at my door. I watched through the window as she got out of her car, and I considered not answering. But I was curious about what approach she'd take, so I opened the door but didn't invite her inside. She stood on my porch and immediately launched into this speech about family and forgiveness and how I was tearing everyone apart over hurt feelings. She said Mom had been having a stressful week, that the comment about me leaving wasn't personal, that I was being vindictive by cutting off their money. She actually used that phrase, their money, as though the funds I'd been providing had somehow become their inherent right. I asked her if she remembered the last 5 times we'd gotten together as a family. I asked if she could recall a single conversation where Mom had asked me about my life, my kids, my work. I asked her if she noticed how different Mom's treatment of her children was compared to mine. She got defensive then, said I was imagining things, that Mom loved us equally. I almost laughed. I told her about the college fund Mom had set up for her, but not for me, about the down payment help she'd received when buying her first house, while I'd been told to figure it out myself, about the constant parade of praise and attention she received while my accomplishments were met with lukewarm acknowledgement. My sister's face shifted then, and I saw something flicker there, maybe recognition or guilt. She said quietly that none of that was her fault, that she couldn't control Mom's behavior. I agreed with her. I told her it wasn't her fault, but laughing when Mom told me to leave made her complicit. I said enabling cruelty was itself a form of cruelty. She left without saying anything else. Update 1. A week went by. I took my kids to school, went to work, came home, and maintained our routine. The constant calling from my family had finally stopped, replaced by silence. I assumed they'd found a way to manage without my support, and I was content with that outcome. Then Dad showed up alone on Saturday morning. I was outside with my son, teaching him to ride his bike without training wheels, when Dad's car pulled into the driveway. He got out slowly, looking older than I remembered, more tired. He asked if we could talk, and I told my son to keep practicing while I stepped aside with his grandfather. Dad wasted no time. He said they were in trouble financially, that they'd maxed out the credit cards trying to cover basic expenses, that my sister was facing eviction. He said Mom was too proud to come herself, but that she was sorry, that she hadn't realized how her words would affect the kids. I asked if Mom was sorry for saying them or sorry for the consequences. Dad didn't answer that directly. He said she was from a different generation, that she didn't always express herself well, that family was supposed to forgive each other. I told him I'd been forgiving them my entire life. I'd forgiven being the afterthought, the backup plan, the son who was useful but not celebrated. I'd forgiven the constant comparisons to my sister, the disappointed looks when my choices didn't align with their expectations, the way they'd barely acknowledged my divorce years ago while rallying around my sisters. I said forgiveness without change was just permission to continue the same patterns. Dad looked at me for a long moment. Then he admitted something I hadn't expected. He said he knew Mom favored my sister, that he'd seen it for years but hadn't confronted it because it was easier to keep peace than to challenge her. He said he was ashamed of that now, that seeing how it had damaged our relationship made him realize he'd failed me as a father. That acknowledgement hit harder than I'd anticipated. I'd spent decades wanting exactly that recognition, and now that I had it, I didn't know what to do with it. I told Dad I needed to think about things. He nodded and said he understood. Before he left, he turned back and mentioned that my daughter's birthday was coming up next month, and he hoped he'd be invited. The vulnerability in that statement struck me because Dad wasn't usually one to show uncertainty. After he drove away, my son asked if Grandpa was sad. I told him yes, probably. My son asked if we could make him happy again, and I said maybe, but that sometimes people needed to learn from being sad. That night, I lay awake thinking about cycles and damage, about how pain gets passed down through generations if nobody has the courage to stop it. I thought about my own parenting, about the ways I was probably unconsciously repeating patterns I'd sworn I'd never recreate. I thought about my kids and what kind of family relationships I wanted them to have versus what I was currently modeling by cutting everyone off. The next morning, I drafted an email to my parents and my sister. I wrote that I was willing to restore financial support under specific conditions. First, Mom needed to apologize directly to my children, taking responsibility without justification or excuse. Second, family gatherings would be at my house for the next 6 months, on my terms, where I could control the environment and leave if necessary. Third, I wanted to start family counseling, all of us, to address the dynamics that had led to this rupture. I also wrote that the financial support would no longer be a blank check. I would pay specific bills directly, provide a modest monthly stipend for groceries and necessities, but the days of unlimited access to my money were over. I explained that supporting them was my choice, not their right, and that choice could be revoked if the disrespect continued. I sent the email before I could second-guess myself. Mom called within an hour. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying my conditions were controlling and unfair, that I was treating them like children. I saved the message as evidence of exactly why boundaries were necessary. Dad called next. His message was different. He said they'd discuss my terms and get back to me. He sounded resigned, but not angry. 3 days later, they all showed up at my door together. Mom looked uncomfortable, Dad looked tired, and my sister looked defiant but present. I let them inside and called my kids down from their rooms. What followed was awkward and imperfect. Mom apologized to my children, though her delivery was stiff and clearly rehearsed. She said she'd spoken unkindly and that they were always welcome in her life. My daughter accepted this with the easy forgiveness of childhood. My son asked if this meant Grandma liked us now, and Mom's face did something complicated before she said yes, she did. I told them I'd restore limited financial access, but that things would be different going forward. My sister started to object, but Dad put a hand on her arm, and she stopped. We discussed logistics, what bills I'd cover directly, and what the monthly stipend would be. It was substantially less than they'd been taking before, and I could see Mom calculating whether it would be enough. Before they left, I brought up the counseling requirement. Mom immediately resisted, saying therapy was for people with serious problems, that we could resolve things ourselves. I said that was non-negotiable, that if they wanted my continued support, they'd attend sessions with me. Dad surprised me by agreeing immediately, saying he thought it was a good idea. We scheduled the first appointment for the following week. Update 2. The family counseling sessions were brutal. Our therapist, a patient woman in her 50s who'd seen every flavor of family dysfunction, didn't let anyone hide. In the second session, she asked Mom directly why she treated her children differently. Mom deflected, said she didn't, that I was being oversensitive. The therapist pressed. She asked about specific examples, and I provided them. The college fund discrepancy, the house down payment, the way Mom attended all of my sister's events, but frequently missed mine. Mom's defense crumbled slowly, and what emerged was something I hadn't fully understood before. She admitted she'd always found me harder to connect with, that I'd been an intense, serious child while my sister had been bubbly and affectionate. She said I'd made parenting feel difficult while my sister made it feel natural. She acknowledged this wasn't fair, that these were her failures, not mine, but that patterns established in childhood had calcified over decades. Hearing her say this out loud, admitting that her favoritism stemmed from her own limitations rather than my inadequacy, shifted something fundamental in me. I'd spent my life trying to earn love that was being withheld not because I wasn't worthy, but because she didn't know how to give it freely. My sister cried during that session. She said she'd known about the favoritism but had convinced herself it wasn't as bad as I perceived, that acknowledging it would mean acknowledging she'd benefited from my pain. She apologized for laughing that day at brunch, said she'd been uncomfortable and had defaulted to Mom's side because that's what she'd always done. Progress was slow and nonlinear. Some weeks felt like steps forward, others like we were back at the beginning. But something had changed in the fundamental dynamic. Mom made more effort with my kids, asking about their lives and actually listening to the answers. Dad started calling me weekly just to check in, conversations that weren't about money or problems, but just about connection. My sister and I began rebuilding separately from the larger family healing. We got coffee one morning, just the two of us, and talked honestly for the first time in years. She admitted the financial support I'd been providing had enabled her to avoid facing her own financial irresponsibility, that having easy access to money had kept her from making necessary changes. She'd started working with a financial advisor and had gotten a better job, was learning to live within her means. She asked if I resented her for being the favorite. I told her the truth, that I had for a long time, but that I was learning to separate her from Mom's choices. She wasn't responsible for how Mom treated me, even if she'd benefited from it. The financial boundaries I'd established remained firm. I paid their mortgage directly, covered Mom's medications, gave Dad a set amount monthly for groceries. My sister received nothing beyond what I'd initially agreed to help with, and she didn't ask for more. They adjusted to the new reality, downsized their lifestyle, made harder choices. 6 months after that disastrous brunch, we gathered at my house for a holiday dinner. I'd been anxious about it all week, worried we'd regress to old patterns. But when Mom arrived, she brought gifts for my kids that showed she'd actually paid attention to their interests. Dad helped me cook, and we talked about my work with genuine curiosity. My sister played with my children, and I saw her being kind and present in ways she hadn't been before. We sat down to eat, all of us together, and it felt different. Not perfect, not healed completely, but different. Better. When my daughter said grace, she thanked God for her whole family being together, and Mom's eyes got watery. After dinner, while we were cleaning up, Mom approached me in the kitchen. She said she wanted to tell me something she should have said decades ago. She said she was proud of me, of the father I'd become, of how I'd built a life and career through my own determination. She said watching me establish boundaries had shown her that I'd become stronger than she'd ever been, that I'd had the courage to demand better. It wasn't everything I'd needed to hear as a child, but it was something I needed to hear as an adult. The incident that had started all of this, that moment of casual cruelty at brunch, had cracked open something that needed to break. The financial leverage I'd used to force change wasn't pretty or comfortable, but it had been effective. Sometimes love means forcing people to face consequences, means refusing to enable dysfunction even when it's easier to look away. My relationship with my family would never be what I'd wished for as a child, but it was becoming something real and honest. That felt like enough. My kids had grandparents who were learning to show up properly, an aunt who was getting her life together, and they were witnessing adults who could acknowledge mistakes and work to fix them. That Sunday morning, when Mom told me to leave, had felt like the culmination of a lifetime of dismissal. Driving away with my children had felt like defeat. But sometimes the willingness to walk away is what finally makes people realize what they stand to lose. And sometimes the thing that breaks everything apart is exactly what's needed to build something better. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot to us.